Hi, I'm here with Patrick Gruban. I'm the co-director of Effective Altruism Germany. Today we're going to be talking about a bunch of things, including Effective Altruism Germany, how boards of effective altruism should work, and maybe like some next steps forward for hopefully some different parts of the EA movement. So thank you for joining. And yes, can you tell us a little bit about your background and a little bit about Effective Altruism Germany?
Thanks for having me, Ozzy. So I started at Effective Altruism Germany in November, and before that, I've been an entrepreneur for the last more than 25 years, actually. So I started my first company right out of school in 1996, I think it was, which was a software development company together with three partners. We got VC funding, grew the company to more than 100 people, and ultimately it didn't work out after the dot-com crisis. After that, I started another company after doing some years of like more consulting and change management and also leadership consulting. The next company was also in software development, but more focused on the finance sector and fintechs. And this company then ultimately got included into a bank, and I worked there for some years. And the last one that I'm still owning is in textiles. It's actually making yarn out of wool for the higher animal welfare standards. I've been doing that for the last 10 years and currently looking to reduce that or sell the company if possible.
So I like that you have quite a bit of experience in a few different industries, as you mentioned. Recently, there's been some discussions about the relative juniorness of a whole lot of the EA scene. I'm curious, you coming into it, what's it like? Like, does it seem like a bunch of the key EA organizations are these like young people who don't really know what they're doing? Like, does it feel like they're startup type people who have some potential but still don't know what they're doing? Or like, how do you find things looking at it
Mhm.
from your experience?
So first of all, when I heard about EA in 2015, and I read about that, I started joining our local group here in Munich in Germany, and really didn't see that I would be able to make much of a contribution. It really seemed like a big difference in age. I never went to university. Everybody was like really like into specific topic areas and really very knowledgeable in these different fields. So I thought, okay, that's it's great to be able to donate to take the guidance on donations, but other than that, probably I won't be able to really get into more direct work. But step by step, with having more interactions with people, the one thing that really struck me was how like open and friendly people are. So the each difference and the difference in experience and knowledge on both sides really didn't seem to matter so much, especially as I got into reading and listening to podcasts and more, and also into a discussion group in our local group and getting more deeper into topics. Then we would basically be just talking on the same level. So that was very nice. And then the second biggest step was actually to go into an e-global, and that was in London in 21, where for the first time I met people that ran organizations and also updated me a lot in the terms of previously I had this view of EA as being like a lot of people that have thought very deeply about all of the different topics that they were publishing about. It seemed very professional, very thought out. But then talking to people that actually run organizations, it seems like the difference between people doing research and people actually managing operational stuff, leadership, organization building was pretty big in the sense that the level on experience and knowledge in these latter fields seemed much less so, and also less experience and less practice than I saw in the startup world. So in startups, typically, I mean, you have a lot of inexperienced people, you have a lot of people trying things out, but people that have the least experience typically drop out. Basically, startups don't work. So you have like a survival bias where you see a lot of people that are actually really good at skilling up or basically doing their second or third startup. So they have more experience in that. I think in the EA organizations, oftentimes you don't see that. The value of the organizations oftentimes linked with the knowledge of the founders in their specific fields, and that doesn't always like translate into like good leadership, good organization building and management skills. So yeah, that basically got me into thinking, okay, perhaps moving into direct work, trying to get into an organization or trying to set up an organization could be valuable for me to do. And yeah, that led me basically to getting getting more experience doing some consulting for organizations and applying at different jobs. So yeah, I think there's a lot of potential there. I think there's also a lot of goodwill in terms of people trying to do the right thing, but oftentimes they're time constrained there, and also oftentimes inexperience. So I think it would be good to have a better mix of people with more experience also working together with people that have less. So this kind of mix I think would be probably better.
So I've been in the EA scene for a while, and I've been in the startup scene, but less so than you have been. Um, I think um, there are many startups that are full of very young people in the beginning, and are very good at a few very specific things. And then some of them mature successfully, and then some of them totally flame out. Right? I imagine some of the strong people you're talking about are some of the people who have been able to grow into leading a mature organization, as opposed to the ones that flame out. I think, in my impression, EAs are very optimized for understanding some aspects of research. Like, it's just very hard. Like, it filters out a whole lot of people in order to get people who EAs trust as like leaders. But yeah, like after filtering out for all those things, it's difficult to also get people who are interested and capable of managing large organizations. Um, like you said, I think anyone right now would say that it would be nice to bring in more like senior talent. Of course, this comes to the dilemma that a lot of startups have when they're trying to become more mature. That like some of the senior talent that you get really does a poor job and leaves you off course, because there are a lot of older people who come from managerial, like MBA backgrounds, who are going to really push things in directions that aren't good. So there's a bunch of stuff to figure out here. One is like just where is EA right now? Like, if we were to be rated on a scale of like A to F, would it be like a B minus, or would it be like what type of startup kind of would be similar to? And then one of the second questions, of course, is like, how do we best understand how to safely integrate managerial experience without everything kind of going off the rails and like losing what EA is good at?
Yeah, I think that's the last one is a really, really important question. I think in terms of like rating, I think that's something that is super hard, just in terms of nonprofit. So I think ultimately the big advantage the for-profit sector always has, it boils down to, do I sell what I want to sell, or don't I sell that? Do I find customers? So the decision between this is a good organization and this is not a good organization becomes transparent pretty quickly. In the nonprofit world, it's much harder because you have some goals. They might lead to more research questions. People leave the organization. It's unclear if it's actually they're leaving because of bad management or because they're not best suited, and so on. So I think the rating question is really hard. But that also goes back to the question more of how can we find good leadership that also manages these uncertainties. And I think it's a really good point to ask the question, how can we integrate more people? So my experience was, if I talk to people that are more entrepreneurial, that have some experience, they typically tend to be more excited about starting the next for-profit startup than going into the nonprofit world. I think there are several aspects. One is just the basic incentives. So for the startup, if it really gets big, you might get a lot of profits out of that. Even if you're thinking of donating all of them, that basically gives you more of a decision-making power, grant-making power than before, versus the downside is that the startup doesn't exist anymore in the nonprofit world. It's basically it goes well versus it doesn't exist anymore. So the upside is much lower, and also you have more people that might judge you. In a for-profit world, you might be much more independent in terms of like doing your own thing, and you have less downside risks to think about, less judgment from the outside. So I think there are many points why more of the entrepreneurial people might choose for profit, which makes it much harder to get more people in. And then, as I said, integrating people that have been in the for-profit world might be harder because of different set of values. People oftentimes get successful by, for example, being not completely honest about their success. Like there's a lot of fake it until you make it approach out there, which can lead to people just bolstering up their image and seeming more successful than they perhaps are. So getting into EA, trying to get more into like the truth-seeking mode, being open to people that may be much younger, but having much like a better sense of certain subject areas might be maybe harder. So I think there are a few things that might affect people. However, I think there's also a model that we haven't explored too much, which is similar to where I'm coming from, basically having somebody who has gone through the for-profit phases and is now at the point where they're saying, okay, actually, now I really want to concentrate on impact. I really want to make sure that the next things I'm doing are, maximizing the good with the resources I'm investing. And for that, I'm also really open to learn new things, interacting with people. And yeah, for me, for example, it was super helpful to have a co-director who's almost 20 years younger than I am, comes from a different background, and just working with her on the strategy for the first 2 months and really making sure that we're aligned helped a lot in terms of also like making sure that we're also looking in a similar way at the world while also integrating our different experiences. So I think that might be one model to do that, having more intensive collaborations between people with different backgrounds and work wheels.
So in terms of the types of senior people we could try to bring on, as I briefly got at, you've been talking about entrepreneurs. There are also like the CEO types. Often entrepreneurs and CEOs are different types of people. Of course, people who are able to be repeated successes as entrepreneurs sometimes are able to become CEOs. In my experience, at least, I've met a bunch of entrepreneurs who've tried to join EA, and a lot of them have very questionable epistemics. Right? A lot of them have like very big egos. They believe that their previous successes were entirely due to their own abilities, as opposed to luck being a major aspect of it. And they also believe that anything that they do is like going to be a major deal. And all their intuitions that disagree with EA are correct, right? A lot of them come with very idiosyncratic personal intuitions that they feel dominate everything. So it seems very difficult to work with a lot of entrepreneurs. That said, of course, there are some very good ones. So Ben West comes to mind as someone who was able to do decently. He had one successful business, and then he joined CEA, and that seems to be working out pretty well. He strikes me as someone who's like quite a bit more humble. You also seem quite a bit more reasonable than a lot of the entrepreneurs I'm used to in the Bay. A very different group are people who are more like MBAs, consultants, and CEOs. Those people typically are less visionary, but more practical. But yeah, I think we haven't engaged with those people as much for whatever reason. In my experience, I think there's now like, I think a consulting network. I don't know how well that's gone. I know when EAs have been very suspicious of McKinsey and Bain and the big consulting firms, which are known for just telling people what they want and doing a pretty mediocre job. All that said, I know that like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation heavily relies on contractors or on these big consultants, which I was very surprised by. But I think now seeing some of the issues that we've been seeing around EA and around FTX, like my guess is that the big managerial consultancies would have caught some of those things if they were paid the money, but they would have also had to get paid a whole lot of money. So I guess some questions here are, yeah, like, so you've talked about entrepreneurs, like how do we kind of select out those with big egos, or how do we, like hypothetically, there could be like some epistemics camp that you could take people with egos in and they come out without egos or something. And like, what do you think of MBA types? And like, which of these groups should we try to rely on more? Should we try to do 50-50? Yeah, yeah, thoughts?
Yeah, I think that there are several aspects that come in. One is definitely personal fit or personal preferences and so on. One organization that I'm really excited about is Effectual, that John Glade started last year. He's also on our board and comes from BCG as a consultant, started a consultant network and is now doing strategy consulting with Effectual specifically for EA organizations. And I think that having somebody that is really has been in different EA orgs before, is highly trusted, and also has the view from the outside, from the strategy consultants, from the big three strategy consultants, I think is really important. And I think somebody like him and this organization can really bridge the gap between both, because I think you need to have somebody who can connect with the values of EA and really understand what it is about, but also have the view from bringing in the outside knowledge and not reinventing the wheel, how we sometimes see that. So, but yeah, how do we find these people? I don't know. I think so far it's been pretty much down to luck. As you said, Ben West is a great example for somebody who made the transition. I think also, yeah, having people in that. I think we have a few good examples of people who did this transition, but it's really unclear how we got them. How can we replicate that? So yeah, I don't really have a good answer on that. I think, but it's valuable to keep looking, and also I think there's a good reason why we do a lot of outreach and community building at universities, where people are early in their career, where it's really still very much possible to where they can change their careers. But I think supplementing that with additional specialized outreach in areas where we see it would be great to get more experienced people that are willing to learn and integrate into the EA values, I think would also be valuable. But yeah, haven't found a solution for that.
Do you have any quick thoughts on like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation? They hired a whole bunch of consultants right out the gate, and those consultants were well paid, and apparently you didn't have to be trained in their very specific way of thinking, and they seem to be happy with that so far. Which raises a question of like, maybe we need specialist consultants who agree with our values a whole lot for some roles, but maybe just in terms of making sure that our boards are good and some other organizational things are done well. Like maybe either we're making a mistake by not hiring the big consultancies, or that like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is making a mistake by hiring them.
Yeah, I think that there's one thing that seems a little bit strange sometimes in terms of EA organizations trying to hire specifically people who are EA value aligned, which I think can be super valuable in the beginning if you're a very small organization and a very small team that really has to agree on the direction of their organization, of the research, of the actually practical work to be done. But if that continues with an organization that has like 10, 20, 50 or more employees, I think that's strange. So I think the bigger the organization gets, the further the role is away from strategic decisions, the less it's important to have EA knowledge versus really having really good subject matter expertise and experience, because the person that runs the organization, or the team that runs the organization, they can make sure that it stays value aligned, and then have the specific experts in their areas. So for example, I wouldn't want to have like a an EA-aligned tax consultant. I really want to have the best tax consultant or the best lawyer or similar things to do that work. So if we are always like selecting for value alignment for any jobs, then we will have just a very much smaller talent pool. And I could see this being true for example, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is a really big organization that can probably like have the people working on the specific fields that need a solution in that area, and then having other people that can make sure that this aligns with the mission of the organization, and that the overall organization culture still is a good one and is aligned.
Yeah, thanks. So I guess going forward about Effective Altruism Germany. So I've never been to Germany. I imagine a lot of our listeners haven't been to Germany. Yeah, I know some things about Germany from what I've read on the news. So just curious to get your take on, like, especially what's happening with Effective Altruism Germany. Like, yeah, what's interesting about it? What's it doing? And yeah, can you just give us a brief overview?
Yeah, so in the last published EE survey, Germany was the third biggest country in terms of number of EAs after the US and the UK. I think there's some founder effect that there used to be like an EA foundation, first in Switzerland and then in Germany, which set up a lot of the infrastructure. Local groups got started. We currently have 25 local groups in Germany. Germany is very much a country that is not very centralized. So we do have the hub in Berlin, where a lot of people sit, but many of the people are also in other cities. I'm in Munich. My co-director is in Hamburg, and also our team members are in different other cities. So that basically also mirrors how Germany is set up. Our universities are less like focused on the top. So I think we have like more universities that are less different. So also university groups are dispersed around the country. In terms of active people in the community, my current estimate is that we probably have between 200 and 400 people. So we have 450 people who took the Giving More to Can pledge, and in the different local groups, we have probably around 200, 300 people attending regularly. We don't have many organizations here. We have Effective Spenden, which is the German donation platform, which just also announced that they got open fill funding for the next years. They've been really successful in raising donations. I think it was 18 million euros 2 years ago. So they grew very well. So that's one organization that is really successful. Otherwise, oftentimes people who get more engaged in EA move to the UK or the US or get remote jobs. So we don't really have the culture here of starting new organizations. Also, basically, before I joined, we had a like pretty dispersed landscape in terms of what was happening. We had one full-time community builder. We had the membership organization that is now Germany, which was started by volunteers and was run by volunteers. We also had Effective Spenden running the German-speaking website. We had the old foundation running the Facebook page. So there were a lot of different things going on with different people. And it seemed like, although we have the third largest EA population, we still have less like per capita EAs than in smaller countries like in Israel, for example, or Sweden or so. So it seemed like a good opportunity to actually take the organization, integrate things that haven't been integrated, and really setting up in a way where we can make sure that we can give people the best guidance into EA careers, having professional services, setting up events like the EHX in Berlin as a yearly event, and just making sure that we support local groups, have a good German-speaking communication and website, and then in the second step, also experiment with different kinds of methods where we're perhaps a little bit unique, that we can use the decentralized state of Germany to try out new things.
Do you have any favorite metrics that you try to grow over time, or estimates of how valuable different?
Yeah, that's a really tough one. So we just published a forum post about impact estimations in community building, and that's something I'm personally grappling a lot with. Like, how do we actually figure out if what we're doing is net positive, and how can we compare it to other kinds of potential investments for funders? Um, a lot of time are basically our goal is to get people to take bigger actions, like taking a pledge, or but mainly actually making career changes and having like seeing what kind of career change actually is, how valuable, especially thinking about probably that we have a lot of value from people working in long-termist areas. These things are really hard to estimate how much contribution one person is making, and also can like be affected a lot by one individual who might be starting a new organization that might be doing outstanding things. So yeah, trying to estimate if like a retreat or an event or a new introductory program or something like that has a bigger effect on people or a group of people versus the time invested is really hard. But I think we could get better in terms of like making it clearer what our underlying estimations are. So I think the rigor that we've seen around trying to evaluate other charities is still lacking in community building, or at least in published community building. Perhaps funders have better models. So yeah, that's something that we've been thinking about, but I think is also something we shouldn't be thinking too much only as a national group. I think that's something where other groups also should get together around that.
So, in terms of community health, it seems like there are trade offs about how quickly do we want to get new recruits to important organizations, or like how much do we care about money in the short term, and like how do we weight that against making sure that people are satisfied in the long term. I imagine that in your case is particularly challenging because if a lot of the people that you invest in just leave Germany after a few years, then you have some key trade-offs to make. So, yeah, do you have any thoughts on like how you're thinking about community?
Yeah. So I think one thing that is a little bit unique about how I approached Germany was that once when I joined, I really wanted to make sure that we're looking at a longer term community health and growth. So typically, oftentimes, community building for many people is something you do for a year after university or while you're still studying, and it's basically something you do as a thing in between because you've been doing that as a volunteer, but you ultimately have some other goal. And I've been always like setting up my organizations for 5 or 10 years, so that's my time horizon. So, which makes it different in terms of thinking about how to work with people. So having a community in Germany that is striving in 10 years means thinking also about like longer term community health points. One thing is, for example, trying to think about how can we get more people to start organizations in Germany, or if they're like joining remotely, other organizations, to think about how can we set up things like hubs and co-working spaces where people feel that they are still interacting with people while working remotely. Another thing is also to have a pipeline of people who would be interested in working in community building and longer term, also skilling up in that area. So having people that are more specialized, for example, in German career guidance and doing one-on-ones and having the right networks here. Yeah, so that's something that's not so often seen. And one part of that is also looking at community health as on a, in addition to the CA community health team, also having somebody as a contact person here in Germany that knows the local context a little bit better, that speaks the language. So on the one hand side, if something happens, if somebody feels unwell, to have somebody to talk to, but also to preemptively give guidance to local groups, like if they're setting up retreats, if they're also making sure that the events they do are really welcoming to people, so that we can actually make more people feel welcome than they might be before, that we can see more of a diversity of backgrounds of people, also worldviews of people, so that we are not at some point just a bunch of people that like per group that is focusing around one cause area that is like predominantly male and young and so on. So just making sure that different kinds of people feel welcome, feel integrated. And I think that can go a long way in terms of making the community more resilient. So if one cause area might be less attractive at some point, or might be going in one certain direction, that we still have other people from other cause areas, from other different backgrounds, like in the community, and similar, also having different funding sources at some point, where we can also make sure that we're less dependent on one actor.
I know that the community health team at CEA has been in the center of a lot of controversy recently. I'm a fan of the team. I think that a lot of that happened because that's just the place where controversy goes, not exactly because of the specific people on the team. Have so issues of what to do about sexual harassment and sexual abuse, and making sure that women don't feel afraid of to be in specific environments. They've made some set of decisions about that, and they have one team on it. Curious to get your take, A, on what things you may do differently, and then B, like if you've come up with any clever techniques or procedures that you do to make sure that women feel comfortable, and men, like people who are currently uncomfortable in the environment.
Yeah, so I'm also a big fan of the CEA's community health team. I think they're really thinking very carefully about things. At the same time, I think it's also good to have different people thinking about that. So I think just thinking that we can just outsource everything to one team that is in relationship to like the discussions and the people and so on, relatively small, I think can also put a lot of pressure on them. And I think it really makes sense to, especially if you have different cultural contexts, to also have an additional person in this context, speaking the language, knowing about the context, that can bring in additional details. So we're working with the CE community health team to also get the person upskilled for us also, and making sure that we have the right resources. So I think one thing that we have less is in Germany is the group house culture, where people tend to have like more closer relationships with each other, and there might be more of the power dynamics going on. And similarly, we also don't have as many organizations where we have people in leadership positions or grant making positions that could misuse the power dynamic situation. At the same time, there are, of course, things that we could be better on. I think one thing is the welcoming culture. So what I've seen myself is that oftentimes we have, like in local groups, meetings where they're either predominantly men or only men in a group. If one woman or non-binary person joins, that might be awkward for them. They might be put in the spotlight. So just always having people on the ground that actually can make sure that the group feels welcoming is, I think, one thing that is important. And also reaching out to people, talking to them individually, making sure that they don't come off with an impression that might be not accurate because they just encountered one group of people that might be very much of a subset of people, might be important. So just in our Munich group, for example, we have a lot of people that are deeply talking and engaged in technical AI safety discussions. If you randomly come to an event and you end up in a group with these people, you might think that you really have to be like very much into this topic to engage in the and being able to talk with people and saying, no, that's just one aspect of the community. We also have a lot of people that are interested in other areas and also with different backgrounds and so on, I think can go a long way. So I would also see that as part of community health, not only acting when there's something going wrong, but also making sure preemptively that we have a broader community, more help, and a better representation of what EA is actually on an international level.
Are there any unique challenges to Germany? You mentioned some things, some ways that Germany has it easy, but what about ways that it has it hard? In terms of community health issues that you have to deal with?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's only partial about community health, but I think we do have challenge that people that are more into topics tend to leave the country faster. So just having good mentorship for newer people that really get the nuances of EA might be harder. So we skew younger, we might have less people that, or sometimes perhaps like discussions that go less in depth, and that can also like bring people to a sense that EA is just about one topic, that, for example, you have to be maximizing a mindset for your life, which can be a challenge for mental health issues. Things like that, I think, are perhaps more of a unique challenge. Also, I think that people have the view that they have to leave the country at some point, or that it's really hard to get actually a career change without leaving the country. Might make people also more anxious, and it might seem harder for them to actually make a change.
Have you, quick question, given that people are more distributed throughout Germany, have you had to figure out any interesting ways of remote working or remote meetings between the people?
Yeah, I think in general, people are very much used to working remotely, and also usually you can find a spot in Germany where most people can get there like in 3 to 4 hours. So just having a retreat and doing some co-working at some point is not such a problem. We also have a really good co-working space in Berlin, and Berlin is also reachable very easily in Germany. So I think, yeah, that can be offset for that. Yeah, I don't think that's so much of an issue. I think it's more not really the co-working issue. It's more of the sometimes people missing like the social interactions, like oftentimes, and not necessarily the social interactions in terms of having fun, more of the randomly meeting up and then talking about ideas, and through this randomly meeting up actually finding a co-founder for a new organization, or actually hitting up a new research question or so on. That's something that might be missing. And as it's as easy to have work remotely with another country or so on, people tend to then also have these kinds of more work-related discussions with non-people in Germany, and that leads them to move away, which I think in most cases is also good. I think we should try to keep them in Germany, but it's just an additional challenge for terms of having longer-term organizations and more really community of professionals in Germany.
Yeah, thanks. So you mentioned before that you want to talk about the resilience of the community, and maybe that like the community doesn't get too focused on any one topic.
Yeah, so I briefly mentioned that I think having people working on different cause areas can make it easier, even if we see that we, for example, at the moment, it would be great to have more people focus on technical AI alignment, but still it's really hard to get in there. Most of the people that try to get in won't like pass the bar for in terms of that they're able to do something. So having other options for these people, I think, is important. At the same time, I think it's also important to make sure that we are like also working on different things. Or, for example, if we have an influx in people in technical alignment in the next year, that we still have people working on other fields. So if it's things get less neglected, or Otherwise, there are other priorities that it's really seen that you can also have different priorities yourself. So I think that's something that can make the community more resilient, that it's not just focusing on a few different areas. Similar, I think also funding sources would be good to really figure out how we can get more people interested in funding this kind of movement building work, other than OpenPhil, who's doing most of that at the moment through CA or the other sources. And also resilience in terms of actually having people around for a longer term, even if they're not yeah, not changing their careers or also doing more the running ticket side, still being there, being able to help. So, for example, our membership organization has been run by volunteers for the last couple of years, and just having volunteers that care about the community, I think, is very helpful, and also makes it easier to for people to just be there and wait until, for example, an opportunity comes where they can actually make a career change or make another kind of contribution, even if they don't see a good fit at the moment.
So you mentioned the funding. Like right now, a lot of community's funding is coming from OpenPhil. I'm a fan of OpenPhil. At the same time, I think OpenPhil has different interests than the median EA community member. So having such a reliance on one funder seems unhealthy, kind of like you were pointing out. Do you have a plan for, like where other funding would come from, and like what types of people would pay for it? Would it be like average community members? And then similarly, how the EA movement as a whole, or at least like more EA community efforts than Effective Altruism Germany, like how should they also try to change over time?
Yeah, it's something I've been thinking about a lot, but so far I don't really have a good answer to. My personal take is I think we should be, in terms of movement building, community building, we should be as attractive for funders as other more direct work. So, for example, making sure that we have a good model where we actually see the impact of our work, and making that more explicit. So I think that's something that probably people at OpenPhil have good models in their heads, but I think other people should also be able to see that, have a more transparency around that, and that might mean also doing more things that are less less or that are more direct. So, for example, I think having a conference where you have a lot of people making contacts and then tracking the contacts and seeing what happens after that seems more easier to think about for a funder than, for example, funding local groups, where it's probably much more longer term, or university groups where it takes some time from initial contact to actually somebody making a significant contributions through their careers. So yeah, basically thinking about how we can split up different movement building activities, and then also having better quantified models around them might be a first step in attracting funders. And I think there are we do have a lot of people who do earning ticket style work, who donate a big part of their earnings. And I think if we can show them that on the one hand side, we're an organization in Germany, as Germany, that has a good track record, that is really reliable and helps people, and then also having some models about our impact that could help. But I think it will take some time. It's not something that you can do in like the first half year that we're still in. It needs more of trust and accountability.
One thing I've been interested in is like if we could get so in terms of who should do the donating, if you have long-term community members, the obvious person to do the donating are those community members themselves. There are a lot of community organizations where members pay dues, or just have events that aren't so subsidized. So like EAGs could hypothetically make a profit, and then the profit goes to basically that similar community. So there's a question of, I guess in the medium term, how much do we want to focus on having the community members pay the money versus the, 2% top earners in that community paying the money, or 2% top earners in the country who aren't even part of the community paying because the community is like an effective thing to donate to.
Yeah, and I think the example of the e-global is good to talk about because there I think oftentimes people think, okay, this is something that CE is doing for the community. It's something that actually is is a nice to have. I think as far as I understand their model, it's much more about we're setting up the conference for people who are at the point where they're actually thinking about a bigger decision, career change, where they can join. And then we add experienced member of the community that might be really helpful. So basically, either you're at the point where you're doing this career transition at that point, where it's more of a marketing approach. We actually would like to have more of these people because we can see that they have a big potential. So should they pay? I don't know. Perhaps it's actually we should pay to get them, or somebody who is enthusiastic about making impact might measure that up, saying, okay, each interaction of this high potential person might be something very valuable. And on the other side, the people who are more experienced in the community, they're actually the ones that we want to have there to pull them in. So having them pay and potentially reducing the number of people that join might also be less interesting. So I think for these kinds of conference, I could see it being much easier to say, look, with a certain amount of money, we usually have these amounts of connections. If we can go the next step and think about what does connection actually mean in terms of expected value of career changes, and then thinking about the career changes that we've been seeing in terms of what impact we can see, we might actually put together a model where it's easier for the donor to actually see that a more direct way from like investing in a conference to actually somebody having counterfactual impact, and that might attract more donors. So I think that's something where basically the donation itself has more of a return on investment style approach, similar to donating for malaria bed nets, where it's much clearer what kind of impact you're getting. So that's something where I see the more of a we need a better communication around that, and a better estimations around that.
It feels a bit like what CEA is calling a community is what a lot of companies would call like a recruiting network, basically. Like if this were like McKinsey recruiting like a set of sessions, and they'd have like recruiting events for like people interested in McKinsey, that would obviously have a very different feel than for there to be like a community of like most of the time I think when people think of the word community, they think of long-term connections, not what the value proposition that you described was, right? So I think that when I go to EAG, I don't think of it that much as like I'm really here to sell and to help out the people who are on the edges of making these decisions. Some of what I'm interested in is like how do I work with senior people to help make very long-term changes, that a bunch of us just need to be connected with each other. And sometimes this means I ignore the younger people. My impression is that there are a few different needs that people are hoping to get. And it is quite difficult to put them all into one bundle that we call community. So trying to figure out how to do that.
I think there's one thing that is really changing at the moment. The question of do we actually want to have a community or fund a community building or so on. So if you go to the CA website, it used to talk about the effective altruism community. Now they're talking about the professional network of effective altruism. So I think that's something that we're seeing at the moment. Holger Karnowski had some comments recently about around is should we downgrade this effort around community building, which was rather vague. Ben Todd just had a forum post about saying like he would see less than like 70% of community building that happened last year as not worth funding. So I think we're getting a lot of pressure and at the same time a lot of uncertainty around what do we actually mean by community building. Um, and I would like to take that apart into some things where we really have a relatively straightforward path into acquiring people, upskilling them, and then enabling them to actually change their careers. So that's a mix of marketing approach and actually education approach, which doesn't really rely on a community of people. It can just be working with individuals, like reaching out through a website, giving them guidance, having them join organizations that might not be EA organizations, just more impactful organizations. So I think with that kind of approach, you don't need a community. Um, it can also mean having more of this kind of professional approach, like a business conference, where people go to the conference that happens once a year. You get new connections, and then you continue working with them, and that also doesn't feel like community. Um, at the same time, I think there is value to, like, especially if you're on a longer term track for a career change, you're doing earning to give, you're the single person working, for example, in a government or institution as an EA. I think for these kinds of people, it can be really valuable to have more of a social network. But the social network I can also see as something that is more privately funded, like something to like where you say, okay,
Yeah.
I pay for having this additional motivation source there. Yeah, so I think at the moment we're like community building has all of these different elements in there, and I think like tearing them apart, making sure that what we're looking at are the parts that we're excited on, and also having different kinds of funders that are excited about different aspects. I could be really helpful, and yeah, but I also think that what we used to see as the e-community like a year ago might not be that what we are going to see in a year's time in terms of what, yeah, this overlap between professional life, private life, people also, yeah, having private and professional connections, commingling, and so on. I think that also goes back to the question of governance and so on, where we, yeah, it's probably natural just to get to the next stage where these things will be more separated than before.
Yeah, definitely get the sense that like a lot of the attention on the EA forum and in EA friends I know is kind of around the misunderstandings and what people think of as like different promises around this topic. I think some junior community members would treat this as like, oh, once you become an EA, you'll get these friends and dating options for life. And like the whole EA bureaucracy is doing an amazing job and everything's going to be like super nice for you. And then some EAs seem to assume that what the EA community is supposed to be doing is making sure that they specifically will be taken care of if things go bad for them specifically. Also, I know that, yeah, from what I hear, different community members seem to assume that what Open Phil should be funding is like them to have hangouts with each other to be better friends, because that'll be useful. At the same time, if I were Open Phil, I'd be thinking, like, I'm just trying to do a ruthless job at being efficient. Some of what that may mean is stuff like, oh, I just want top talent for AI safety organizations or something. And I really don't care about this other stuff. And it also just feels very strange to fund people to have parties with each other, right? Like you do parties, but that's like a very weird charitable endeavor to fund this specific collection of people to just like have fun with each other. Like that's not something that you want to fund. Um, yeah, so it feels like there are just different expectations and assumptions over here. One thing that makes it challenging is that the funders I think haven't been very upfront with what they're trying to get out of it. A lot of the funders, there's just like not much writing online in the way that they value things and like the commitments that they're kind of making. And similarly, I think the community members just, are very diverse in what they think. There just doesn't seem to be that much candid discussion on some of these topics, which is one reason to have it now. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I think I really value that CA. In my experience also, I mean, we're at EU Germany, we're all funded by community building grants through CA, and they've been very much hands-off-ish in terms of our strategy and having enabling us to really set up the organization so that it benefits people in Germany. So I think I would probably not really want to have like a very strong model approach, but at the same time, this also means that we probably have a lot of different national and city groups, but also university groups and so on that act in different ways. So it's probably different groups go in different directions. My personal introduction into the Munich group was much more of a professional group. We had more people that were professionals doing more, being in business and then donating and then upskilling versus, so in other cities that I've then later discovered, I saw more of the socializing aspect that we really didn't have so much in Munich. So I got into the social part of EA much later than the more getting together on the object level part. I like both. I really would. It would be a big shame if we would lose the part of the community where people really feel part of it, because I think it can be super valuable, especially if you're aiming high. If you're basically applying for jobs where with high expectation you will get rejected for a long time, you're starting organizations with high likelihood will fail, you're trying to get grants for research, you're doing independent research for a long time, and with a high level of or with high probability that this will be something that won't lead to actually an outcome. So for all of these cases, I think it's really important to have a community of people that actually understands what you're doing, because otherwise people from the outside it's really hard to convey that. Why are you doing that? Why are you not getting like a normal job? Why don't you just earn some money and donate it versus really trying to aim for that? So I think that's where the social aspect of the community can be really valuable, but I think it can also be like the source of things like power dynamics. If people are completely in this kind of settings and also interact with people that have other kinds of powers, that can be harmful. It can be also mean that basically you really want to stay part of the community because it's all of your friends. So not losing your job or not losing your funding can mean much more than just losing your source of income. And then also it also can lead to it being just harder for other people from the outside to come in who don't really want to be part of a whole like social sphere, that just want to do their job and really work well. So yeah, I think it's complicated. I think it would be a shame to lose that, but I also think that in terms of like official funding projects, I think we will probably see more and more of that going in the direction of more of the professional network side versus just broadly funding community activities that might include more of the social side.
So let's pause here. I'll just do it, Mark. We've been talking about for about an hour, so it's just probably a good time to take a short break. So maybe take a 3-minute break and then discuss how it's going quickly, and then get into, this is probably a good time to transition into the discussion in boards.
Yeah, sounds good.
Cool. Yeah, thanks so much.
See you.
How you doing?
Hey, good. How are you?
And yeah, doing okay.
That's good.
Waking up a bit, which is great.
Yeah, I hope my answers are
Yeah.
coherent. Sometimes I forget what the question was when I'm at the end of the answer. So.
Yeah, it's definitely messy stuff, and apologies. I think a lot of the questions I come up with as I talk, so they weren't like written down in the beginning, but it led us to some interesting places.
Yeah, makes it more spontaneous.
Yeah. I would say I feel like you're giving pretty diplomatic answers, which is something that you're probably pretty good at, which is probably a useful thing for your job. But for some of these, obviously what I'd push for, like what I want is like just more short and like spicy, whereas spicy could mean like X is 2/3 as good as Y, or like, can like how good things are, as opposed to like these things are also good and that's like also a valuable thing. But I realize like that's more of a decision for you to make.
Yeah, if you see something where you think this could be more specific, feel free to ask. I can still decline, but I can also try to make it more specific. But I'll also try to think about that.
Yeah. Cool. Do you have a hard time limit? I don't think boards should take us too much. All right, great. Okay. So I'll try to aim for another 40 to 60 minutes probably, but happy to. Yeah, and also don't feel pressured to give long responses. Like it's easy for me to come up with a bunch of questions for some of this stuff. So if you have that much to say about something, let's try to move, because I'm like, cool. Okay, so let's start the transition to discuss boards, which is a topic that I think both of us are interested in. So to begin, you said, you mentioned previously that I think Effective Altruism Germany is a membership association with members that elect the board. Is that true? And can you expand on that?
Yeah, so we currently have 85 members in the organization, and once a year we have a General Assembly. At the General Assembly, the board is elected, so board members can come up for a re-election, or new people can also apply to be part of the board. So that means that if people are not happy with board members, or board members also want to do something else, there can be a transition. Last year there was a bigger transition, and the people that came into the board were more active in terms of like really pushing for people working at the organization. They basically came up with the idea of hiring my co-director and me, and also be making more ambitious plans. So I think as the board, they can we're able to set the direction of the organization and start the search for the co-directors, which I think was the most important thing that they did and should be doing as a board. But then knowing that they also have oversight for the members, they also have this additional responsibility. So they're not only, which I think is often the time the thing for boards in the UK and the US and nonprofits, that they're only accountable for themselves. They are really accountable to the members. Yeah, and in terms of members, I think that's also something that is specific. So at eGermany, not everybody can become a member, so you have to apply for membership, and then the board decides after an interview if they actually approve the new member or not. So one prerequisite that is in the statutes is actually that people are knowledgeable and engaged in the EE community. So they should have some prior knowledge about EE topics, and they should also show that they have some kind of engagement either through the work or through the local communities or similar. And that means that we really have a really great member basis where I think it's valuable that they can actually have this kind of decision around setting up the board. So I think that's something where we are a little bit unique, I think, within the EE organizations.
Do you feel like the members have any different priorities than the funders? And or is there any interesting tension over there?
Haven't thought about that too much. I mean, the funders, and especially, I mean, CEA as the funder, They have a certain set of criteria, what they're interested in community builders, which is mostly informed by people being the sole community builder in one location, or one or two of two community builders. So they're, I think, mostly focused on the person and the performance of the person, versus the members of the organizations thinking about like long-term health of like the German community. So I think in terms of like just vision, community members can be just much more longer term, CE much more shorter term. And also community members much more focused on the organization, on the infrastructure, versus CA more on the person itself.
Just a little bit about these members. Were they instated, did you say, like before you joined?
The organization was started by volunteers, by the first members. They set up this kind of organization where they would interview people and only add people after the interviews. I've been part of the organization for 3 years now. I started out as doing financial audits, also as a volunteer. So I was a little bit active, but not super active in the organization. And then when the job posting came up, I applied like everybody else and went through the normal application process, which was like a co-process from the board members and from CA, because CA is the funder, so they were also wanted to have a say into selecting people with and their focus, I think, was mostly around deeper EA knowledge, getting people there.
Wait, so when was initial organization formed? You said you started 3 years ago. But...
Yeah, so that was in, I think, 2019, the organization was started. And in 2020, I joined. Yeah, at the beginning, it was basically the organization did some infrastructure services. For example, had some online tools that could be used by members in the community. They also set up regular calls for community builders. They had meetings. So it was more of a like sharing experiences between people, but on a volunteer basis. And then 1.5 years ago, they also started an employer of record service, which basically enables people who get a grant in Germany to get employed by the organization. So instead of taking care of taxes, getting a lump sum payment at one point as a grantee, you can get employment, normal social security services. So that was one of the initial services the organization did, which was pretty popular. So we have several people employed through that at the moment. And then step by step, they thought more about like getting more ambitious and actually starting setting this up as an organization. So hiring us as co-directors, and after we got on board, also we hired a project manager with an operational associate. We're now hiring for a communication person, and also just hired somebody to lead the team for the EGX in Berlin in September. So we started running this organization as an organization with employees was something that was new when we started in last fall.
So I think there's a broader conversation now of should more PE organizations have semi-democratic structures, specifically the community building ones. I think things like CEA would be the obvious candidate. So having experience with related organizations trying out these types of proposals seems like a good thing, but also getting clarity on them is useful. I think you're probably in a bit of a tricky position that because you were hired by these people, you may not be the best person to be candid about them. But you do know a lot about it. So I guess like some questions here. One is, have there been any like tensions and controversies so far within this cluster of people, or of people who are upset that they didn't gain membership status? And then a similar one is, did it basically lead to the same decisions, do you think, that the board or like a reasonable board would have made anyway? In which case, it's not clear where the value was so far.
Yeah, I think I don't know about any controversies. I think, so as far as I know, the people that didn't make the cut into terms of being members Also, for them, it was clear what the next steps are in terms of like just getting more knowledge, getting more engaged. So I think there was never like this cutoff of you will never get to be a member. It's more like, okay, you're not at this point at the moment, but this is what you can do. So I think it seems like it, or never seemed like a problem in that direction. I think for other organizations like CEA, it's much harder. For us, it's just unique because we just have this geographic boundary, and so we can say we're the organization in Germany, and people in Germany joined. We have a lot of like with 85 members in a community that might be between 200 and 400 people big. We're like a big part of the highly engaged people in Germany are part of the association. So I think that's just helps a lot. As CA or other international organizations, I wouldn't know where to start. I think Dr. Moskowitz discussed a little bit on the forum around in terms of membership organizations and who should be member, and if we have democratic decisions, that this is really hard to gauge who is actually like who is in the EA who should be like be able to do decisions. So I think setting something up after the fact, like saying, oh no, now we're setting up this as international membership organizations is really hard because it can, on the one hand side, it can probably be gamed, or it can lead to just people who've been around a long time being part of that, not new people. So I think it's probably really hard to set that up after the fact. In Germany, as this organization has been around for a couple of years, I think, and in the beginning there was no huge incentives in becoming a member. I think it just led to a good set of people in the community. I'm not sure if that really changes anything in terms of how the board works. So for me, it seems more that board members are motivated just to do the right thing, and them having the community members in the back that might oust them is probably not the biggest worry they have. They're doing that as a volunteer thing on the side. I think it might add to the motivation. So if you know that once a year at the membership meeting, if you actually do a good job, you can members see that, and that we're recognized. That can like be additional benefit, whereas other nonprofit boards are probably so much like obscure, like just it's basically a list of names on the letterhead, nothing more. That I think having this kind of general assembly thing might be motivating, but yeah, that's just one speculation.
Yeah, just thinking about it on my end, it sounds the way that you're describing it that there just haven't been many controversies or very spicy personalities or like big power grabs within the Germany membership yet. Within EA generally, we've definitely had some. I could definitely imagine that if there was like a voting mechanism, maybe there would have been like an FTX faction that would have tried to risen up and own the majority, or maybe like we've had previous groups like Leverage Research that tried trying to kind of make some power grabs because they thought EA wasn't going in the direction that was a good one, so they tried changing that, and people had a lot of issues with that. Right now, arguably the EA forum is decently democratic, in the sense that at least more people get votes than get votes on key funding decisions, right? Which is like a very small group of people. EA forum, even though some people have more votes than other people, lots of people can vote and still write angry comments if they want to. And I think that the things that do the best on the EA forum aren't exactly the best things. Like often we've seen that there are some very angry posts that get a lot of reactions, sometimes just because people are afraid of them, so have to react. Or sometimes like some very short arguments would get like a huge amount of upvotes, even though they're not very humble. And that goes on both sides, like many sides of arguments I see doing that. So I think, yeah, there's also the fact that there's a lot of money now in EA, which means that there's a lot, with EA Prime, which means that there's a lot at stake. And then, of course, a lot of people have very intense feelings about animals versus AI versus humans, or when it comes to AI, what should we do about AI? So trying to organize all of them into an environment that is productive and doesn't lead to breakdowns in situations where we actually give them more authority seems like a tricky thing to do without it going horribly wrong.
Yeah, I think the probably it's always easier in general to criticize than come up with a suggestion. So having a more of a democratic structure that actually means that people would have to like come up with a solution for a problem instead of just criticizing that might improve things, but it might just also lead to people engaging less. So I think yeah, the forum, as you said, an angry post, something criticizing somebody or an institution or a practice or so on is easier and is easier to like than a specific proposal like that actually has to work in the real world with the set of people that we can actually attract. I think that's also something like oftentimes criticizing institutions and then like when I talk with people individually in these institutions, they oftentimes see issues or yeah, there are things that are known, but there's just too few people that are available, that are knowledgeable, that you might solve these problems at the moment. So I think once you really engage with what can be done, what can be changed, it's much harder than just to criticize that. So um, yeah, I don't know if a democratic structure would solve these things. It would be great to have people that are really more engaged on in the sense of really taking ownership versus just criticizing stuff and having the feeling that they can actually have more ownership. That it's not this kind of top-down approach of this is the big institution that actually makes all the decisions and we now have to suffer versus in reality, it's, I mean, all of the EA organizations are relatively small in terms of less than 100 people or so, and relatively new and young and just doing their best trying to figure stuff out. Yeah, and so making that clearer, making that people having more ownership would be great, but I'm really unsure how we can do that. So in terms of our organization, I think it's easier because yeah, it's closer. People know each other. We know everybody, like probably or most of the members. They are engaged in the local group, so it's just much clearer to them and probably more obvious to see what's going on, versus in an international community with people dispersed in different areas. It's probably much harder. So yeah, I don't know how that can apply. And also the other thing is that we don't we don't have the money to make grants, so there's less incentive for a power grab. So it's basically, yeah, you can have the power, but then you also have to do the work.
Yeah, the stakes do help. So about boards in general. So you said that you have experience with different boards at this point. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so for my first company, when we got VC funding and then also set up the board, obviously the VC was part of the board. That was a bigger decision also who to take on as a VC, and who also got to be board member of that organization. And for us, one really important thing was to have somebody who's an advisor in a specific field. So in that at that point, we were getting into expanding internationally. So just having somebody who actually set up an organization already that worked internationally and having this person as an advisor was really important. And I think, of course, you can always have like additional advisors coming on, but I think having somebody on the board who's an advisor has like also aligns the interests. So um, some of the reputation of the organization um, is is um, is also there on their reputation, so they're probably more engaged um, to really give good advice. Also giving more longer term advice versus other advices might be more focused on the short term. Um, and having also somebody who's able to actually look into more confidential things. For example, having a board member who's knowledgeable about the finance might be helpful in terms of them having access to all the finance data versus an external advisor who might also get that, but who you would not yeah, trust as deeply, or who would also not be able to share that with other board members. So yeah, I think having somebody as an advisor, as a board member, was important. Having board members actually thinking about the longer term future of the organization in terms of what are the risks to the organizations, looking at things like the talent pipeline, saying, okay, as we have to plan for the CEO potentially stepping down. We have to plan for major leaders in the organization stepping down, looking for them, making sure that there are people there that might be successors, was important. And then basically, yeah, doing pre-mortems on financial risks, legal risks, reputational risks, and making sure that things that might go wrong are already thought about and already buffered. So yeah, I think that this kind of holistic thinking about the longer term future of the organization, regardless of the CEO, and advising in special cases, that were things that were really helpful for me at that point.
How many board members did you have then?
At that point, this company, we had, I think, 4 or 5. I'm not exactly sure anymore. It's been a long time since then.
It does seem kind of interesting that when you need good advice about a few different industries, that advice has to be so correlated with where you get money from, right? Like in some worlds, you could get money from any VC and just like pay for advice. Like, why is it so important that it has to be a board member and it has to be connected to that VC?
Yeah, I think it's easy to find people who give advice as professional advisors, like professional consultants or people that are subject matter experts. Getting somebody who has been like a successful entrepreneur and like has been through the experience that you're going through is something much harder to get. So that's typically something where you get a business angel or VC or so in, because yeah, they know that what their advice is worth and are able to get basically a stake in the organization. So yeah, it's probably just a thing that it's harder to get
So
these
basically,
people.
yeah, like those people don't, they're just not on the market in terms of paying
Yep.
per hour. You have to only get them as a board member.
Yep. Right. And yeah, with typical advisors, they will have solutions that like work from in a very general technical sense, but they can't tell you how to really implement them within an organization, like making sure that it works in the organizational culture. But yeah, that's something very specific on the side and on the business side, which probably doesn't translate so well to the nonprofit world. Um,
Yeah.
for me, coming into Germany, the first thing that so I applied for the job without having much knowledge about the board. When they told me that they wanted to have me join, the first thing I did was to talk with all the different board members and asking them if we as co-directors would be able to execute our goals without micromanagement. And luckily, we really have a board that is that wanted that was very much on that. So basically, having a hands-off approach, having oversight over the co-directors, but not doing micromanaging. And I think that's something that is super important, because I think having a board that tries to manage at the same time as having somebody as manager in can be really harmful. On the other side, also, I think it can be harmful if the board is super hands off and doesn't have any oversight at all. So I think the sweet spot is where the board knows what is going on in a broad sense and can intervene at points where they see that that there is like a bigger issue that might lead to having to replace the management, or yeah, that risks the organization in financial, legal, reputational sins, and making sure that this comes up early enough and is handled at that point.
Do you have any intuition on how many hours a month good board members should spend?
I think most of the time, not so many. Like if everything works well, then it's basically um, I don't know a call every other month or so with the board, making sure that everything is working fine, and then having a yearly review of the management and financials and so on, which is a couple of hours. If things don't work well, then it's more like crisis mode and then having more frequent calls and stepping in. So I think that's really hard to say. So it can be between I don't know 2 hours a month and yeah 10 to 20 hours if something really goes wrong. Although that's probably more focused on a few board members that really take on their responsibilities and the others basically trusting them and just being there for discussion.
Yeah, I guess I'll chime in a bit. So I've been on two boards, Rethink Charity and Rethink Priorities, and also our organization as one board. But our organization is Quantified Uncertainty and Research Institute. We're very small, so we just have two board members, and that side is minimal. I think I think you previously mentioned that you've read Holden's post, Why Nonprofit Boards Are Weird. To me, the strange thing is that a lot of EA organizations are just very small. What I'm used to is a situation where people have managers, and the managers are both trained, and when they do a good job, that's recognized and tracked, and when they do a bad job, that's recognized and tracked. With board members, you don't get most of those privileges. Board members, typically what board members do is very private, kind of intentionally, which means that if a board member does a good or a bad job, not many other people know. Often they're chosen by the people that they're in charge of, which is not how you'd want bosses to work, right? Often they don't have much training, and it's not expected that they have long-term career prospects for it. Obviously, it's often not paid, right? So we have something that's not really incentivized in many ways and not guided. So it doesn't strike me as that surprising that it is quite challenging. And we see boards often doing a pretty mediocre job. The obvious thing to do from my perspective is just not have boards in terms of, just having bigger organizations. So we don't need as many boards and every level of it. So more groups have managers. Not many people have boards. But if we do have boards and if we want to focus on that for some reason, there are probably, of course, changes that we could make to make them good. But it does require some work. So one challenge is who evaluates the board? Typically, like I said, they basically go unevaluated. It's definitely not like the ED's role to evaluate the board because that'll be a conflict of interest. Also, who makes sure that boards have standardized policies between them? So one example of a approach to improve boards would be to have one central organization that basically has a board member on every organization that tries to make sure that the organization follows a playbook of board practices at least, and then also gets evaluated in a common way. But I'm also, of course, interested in other proposals. We could have something where every board is evaluated by some, centralized or decentralized community or something, because it feels like an area where responsibility and evaluation becomes very nebulous, and any kind of obvious incentives besides just trying to do good, which works well in the short term. But if you're trying to make a long-term career as someone with management responsibilities, you really penalize your career by spending a lot of time as a responsible board member.
Yeah, I think there are a few points that could work. I think one thing is the question of stakeholders. So, for example, as an organization like we are mostly financed by CA. So I would see it as legitimate for CA, for example, to say, well, we're doing most of the funding. We also now want to be have a seat on the board, similar to OpenPhil saying something like that at CA. Which is very natural in the for-profit world as a VC coming in. And there you also have alignment and in terms of their incentives. So having this one board member in, they can then actually also like try to get more influence on the other board members and make sure that their policies implemented. But as I say, like accountability between board members is also a little bit weird in terms of one people like being basically making each other accountable. So yeah, I think for that, a membership organization seems more apt because ultimately the members decide. So you have to, as a board, you have to present what you've been doing for the last year. And if they are not convinced, they can basically elect somebody else. So that might be a possibility. I think a third thing that comes up might be more of a set of standards and audit standards or things like that. Basically, a governance structure that is enforced. My current company, for example, is we produce textiles according to the Global Organic Textile Standard, which is like a standard that not only looks at the producers but also at the companies. So once a year, we have like auditors coming in and tracing all the different like production transactions that we did. So similarly, you could have like a set of standards where you have auditors coming in and making sure that practices are followed, which could be things like are you actually giving grants to like family members or spouses or partners? Are you actually adhering to do you have some stress tests on your organizations and actually trying to figure out what would happen if something would go wrong, which I think is something which it seems like Rethink Priorities has been doing in terms of like FTX not paying and like having that in an organization is something that sounds really good and could be enforced by something like these kinds of standard practices. So that's something where, for example, a funder is saying could come in and say we're willing to fund you as an organization, but if we do that, you have to adhere to these standards, and that includes like being audited or signing off on some documents or having like whistleblower protections for people or so on. So I think that doesn't have to go through boards. I think that could also go through these kinds of certifications or something like that.
Do you have any thoughts on board members being paid in the future, or I assume that they're not paid now?
They're not paid now. I think in general, it's. I think that it probably is would be interesting to get them to get basically hourly compensations, but not some payment where it's like a fixed payment. So more compensating for the time lost versus having it as an incentive. So I think having more of this volunteer structure is probably good, and I think yeah, I would like to, but I also would like to get more people invited to boards that have, for example, more for-profit experience, more experience, for example, in things like finance and legal aspects and so on, just to have a diversity of expertise in boards. And I think it seems like the Good Governance Project has a list of people who is interested in these kinds of fields. Could be interesting to see if that actually, if there's sufficient like talent out there, and to see if we can get like a bit, perhaps sometimes a bit bigger boards in EE, but also like boards with more specialized knowledge in them.
I think we should go about dealing with and potentially exposing bad board members. I imagine in small organizations, if the way that they're voted on or off is based on a vote of the board, then that has to be some political maneuvering. In the case of your organization, there's a question of, how candid can you be about people who are not performing to the standards that you'd like? And then what's the process of actually removing them? I imagine, is there a scenario where if someone is just doing a poor job or a manipulative job, that you have to wait, 8 months until the next election? And then once that happens, you have to like run a kind of messy campaign to expose that person's like dubious actions to the, all of the members.
My intuition would be that how cooperative people normally are in EA, that if some people go to one board member and tell them, look, you're not adhering to the standards, we'd like you to step down either now or at the next membership meeting, that most would probably do that because they see that now they're basically isolated within the organization, and if they don't cooperate, then they basically have. It's really hard to see that they have a future in EA because of the high value that we put on cooperation. So I think that's one point I could see. Um, the Yeah, and if that doesn't work, then I could also see that basically the other board members like basically voting over this one member and trying to ignore them at some point until the next meeting is.
So
But yeah,
should it be like at EA Germany, board members each other off, or the majority could vote the minority off?
no, that's it's just the membership or the general assembly that votes on
Yeah,
board
yeah.
members. But if the board decides basically a majority vote, and if one of the board members is not cooperative or like against the others, then it's probably not such an issue. We currently have 6 people on the board, so yeah, if there would be one rogue actor or so on, that would probably be not so an issue. Yeah, so I couldn't see it in practice. I think it's I'm more in favor of having a little bit bigger boards because of this possibility. Also because of like just somebody dropping out, or I mean, like at EV at the moment, if 2 board members are basically have to like excuse themselves from one decision, and you generally only have 4 people on that just seems like a very small decision-making group at the moment. So yeah, having a bigger board, having a more diverse board seems more sensible in that sense.
Do you feel like things are candid and honest enough that if someone were underperforming, that they would be asked to leave? My impression is that you are right that it is rare right now in EA organizations for people to be combative enough to be bad enough to have to be forced out. However, at the same time, I also see them because they're so non-combative. I've basically never seen people try to push each other out, even when they should. And I'm sure that there were many situations where board members should have left, but just yeah, people are just very kind to each other and want to underplay performance.
Yeah, I can definitely see that as a failure mode. I'm very happy that last year we also had like a change in the board, where the new board that came in was like really pushing for a more ambitious agenda than before. Um, but yeah, I'm not sure how much, if there would be board members that are very complacent but still want to be part of the board. It can be probably harder to get them to change. Yeah, it's probably also a thing that is a general problem of boards in itself. Um, yeah,
Any other key failure modes that you see in EA boards in general, or that you're nervous about?
I think one thing that I really find weird is the situation at EV. There's it's one organization, several CEOs, and one board. And I think the relationship between board and management is really important to it. So basically, the board making sure that the management is evaluated, and if they're not there, they're changed, and the management really taking ownership of the organization. We doesn't or had before that, like the current interims changes didn't really have this one like person taking responsibility for the organization. So I'm not very keen on this kind of situation. I would rather really have organizations where it's clear this is the one person or the team that manages the organization and having oversight of them. So I think that's something I was a bit worried about. Also, I think the thing of having practice of having boards that are very long term and not changing, and possibly also having more social friendship or interactions with in the community might be a possible failure. So that might point more in the direction of having a little bit bigger boards, having people from that are not super core and in the community, but a little bit on the outside, coming in and just making sure that there's a little bit more of this kind of diversity. Yeah, I think that's what I would say.
I take it, would you by chance be willing to rate the average EA board from like an A to F, both now and like where you think it could get in 5 years with specific interventions?
Yeah, I think that for that I really don't have enough insight. So even if I would think more about that, I would really think I would want to have more transparency. So I think, for example, that GiveWell has the meetings of their boards online, and basically they started out with just having also audio recordings of board meetings, was something that just in terms of symbolic value was really really good, I think. And it's perhaps a little bit of a chance that was not taken up, just to use the model of GiveWell and then implement that at other organizations. So I think just the transparency, there's lack of transparency, which really makes it just really hard to see if the board is good or not, because you just don't see anything.
Although even GiveWell, my impression is that they have open board meetings, but often the board meetings are a small subset of the conversation that a board has, right? Like a lot of conversation happening in other channels. And also from those board meetings, in my opinion, it would be difficult to know how good board members are being, right? Because a lot of the key stuff that they do is outside of the meeting. So it is a useful thing, but it's, probably a minority of the total set of things that we need before confirming that a board is doing a great job, or is in a good place.
Yeah, it would be great to have like ex-managers telling a little bit more about how they felt the board was doing, being more candid about that, and just having some kind of rating between people. But yeah, I think in a close-knit community where people expect others to be very much they're relying on the others to also be cooperative in the next projects, it's really hard to get a very candid view on performance.
In terms of candidness, I know that there is a wide spectrum of different cultures in terms of how candid they're allowed to be. So in Japan is on one extreme of the power distance ranking, which kind of says how candid people are willing to be with their bosses specifically, but I think it kind of tracks more generally. And then Israel is on the other extreme. More similarly, or more specifically, I know Bridgewater has a culture where people are generally extremely candid, or extremely on the candid end for what we're used to. EA seems to be very similar to the average Western culture, from what I gather, which is definitely lacking in candidness. I think it kind of falls mid-range of what countries are used to, but arguably you could go quite a bit further than Bridgewater is. So there's a question here about what would good norms be of like public information about how good board members are being, or how good boards are being, and more related organizations. So what are people comfortable with now? What would we like them to be comfortable with ideally? And like where could we kind of aim for 3 to 5 years from now? On one extreme maybe would be something like having a dashboard of how good of a job every single board member is at every EA organization. And then maybe a specific, more, if you want to be extreme, every single individual within every EA organization or every project, right? The other extreme is a lot of this is kept nebulous. Maybe an intermediary is that there's private information, so there's like an internal dashboard that only a few people have access to. Of course, that is tricky when we have such a loose and decentralized power structure.
Yeah, I could see something like a volunteer thing where board members say, I'm willing to be rated, and I voluntarily also submit to that, and then publicly some ratings is available, and that basically creates a structure where it's hard to say as a board member that you're not adhering to that because it makes you more suspicious or less transparent. Something like that, where basically it's something voluntary and you're really asking for also negative ratings, but it's basically a norm. It gets to be a norm. Versus doing that now, I think is really hard to implement that. But I also think there's always the question of how open, transparent you should be. In some instances, it's I yeah I don't know if it's really necessary to have everything super public, but for example within the organization it would be good to know for employees to know how good the board is. Similarly, that the board for them to know how the board rated the management or so. So that would be something good. Um, I consulted with one organization, helped them a little bit around organization culture, and they had really good culture around openness and talking about mistakes, where management was very candid about discussing that. And I think something like that would be really good to also implement on the board level. Just having the norm of board members openly saying when they were wrong, when they made a mistake, and basically going more in the Bridgewater direction of valuing openness and focusing less on the mistake itself. Then if you don't communicate the mistake, then it's basically a big no-go. But as long as you're open about mistakes, then that's good, and that should be pushed.
Yeah, this is like a pretty messy and complicated issue. So you could go into other details, but I'm happy to, just leave that for now because that could be a whole few hours. Anything about like reducing different risks through the board? So you mentioned legal, financial, and reputational a bit.
Yeah. So I think having a board that like regularly does a pre-mortem, sees how the environment changed, for example, in terms of funding, in terms of risks that we're seeing in the community, in terms of like media risk and so on, and thinking about that might enable. And I think a board can like inherently look a little bit further than the management. Day-to-day management, you're always like dealing with immediate problems. You're looking perhaps ahead for a few months, but other than that, it's really hard to really get the headspace to actually think about the longer term things. You have a lot of blind spots, so having advisors that think about the blind spots, I think, are good, especially people that have some skin in the game in the organization. In terms of if that doesn't go well, then they've been on the board. Like if the board members have the feeling that they have some ownership on the organization, and then also think about what could go wrong. I think that's a good combination, or at least asking the management regularly about reports and about things that might raise flags in terms of being going wrong.
Great. So any last things about boards? I guess this is a big discussion topic.
Yeah, I think it's great to think about boards carefully. I think there's also the other side where we're relying too much on, if we just get a good board, then we can de-risk organizations and make organizations go better. I think there's another thing that we might look more, where it's also really good to look into, is basically the governance structure of an organization, which management has in their hands, and also like the thinking about retaining employees. So I think oftentimes the organizations don't think or have less experience about good leadership styles and about culture, and my take is always, as a manager, you have like the responsibility on the object level to get results, but at the same time, you also have the responsibility to retain your employees. So if you're like not having a healthy culture, a healthy leadership style, then you're not doing the right thing. So that's something that where boards can exchange the management, but they if it's really hard to come up with the right leaders, then we still have the problem. And same thing about basically the governance. For example, having things in place like conflict of interest policies, so that we are not like hiring people that we just accepted gifts from or got funding from or so on. And also having really good practices in terms of making sure that we're doing adhering to laws that we have, like looking at the financial runway of our organization, that we have enough transparency so that others can actually see potential risks from the outside. I think there are many things that we can do as in terms of the management, where a board can push the management in that direction, but we can also have like more of a set of standard practices within the organization saying, in addition to just adhering to laws, we should also have this list of things that seem broadly good and just reduces the risks of either bad actors or just oversight because we forgot some things and now we have a huge risk.
Yeah, I think the way that I look at it is that if we were a big organization that were run decently, there are definitely a lot of bad big organizations, but they would have a lot of systematic procedures for different teams, right? Like all teams would have to go through the same HR processes, same legal processes, same onboarding. A lot of that would be very standardized. Given that we have so many tiny organizations, some amount of standardization seems like a very reasonable ask. But of course, actually doing that standardization, like we do need someone to figure out what all these rules are, and then to make sure that they're implemented decently.
Yeah, I think we're seeing some good progress in that field. So we have Anti-Entropy as a consulting organization that compiles a list of standardized procedures. Chatter Entrepreneurship does that for their organization, basically compiling things. And then we also have, like on the community builder side, we also have an initiative to set up standardized processes at the moment. So that is happening, which is really great. And that's also something I'm always like happy to cooperate on. And also, I think that's also what is really great, that people are super helpful and actually helping out with these processes. So yeah, that's, I think, more positive that we're seeing more of that, and that also like funders and people on the EU forum and so on will be more enthusiastic and pushing for these kinds of good practices that we can see them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Definitely a lot to do. So yeah, to kind of wrap it up, do you have any high level, like after discussing all of that, we've gotten a bit into how EA in general could improve. But are there any other things that come to mind, either within boards, outside of boards, or that are just influenced by your background or EA Germany?
I think my two main things probably are, at the moment, I hope that more people like are open to serving as board members, even if it's not paid, if it's sometimes really not very fancy, and if it's really just a distraction of your time and so on. I think making it's clear that this can be super valuable, I think, is important, and especially people that are perhaps not super into direct EA work, but are more on the like earning give or outside side, that they can be really valuable to get in, and especially if they have previous experience with boards. On the other hand, I also hope that more boards of organizations are open to add more members or new members and people that bring really a diversity of views. Yeah, and if they have that mix, I think that could be a really good next step forward. And yeah, I hope that will
Do you have any quick
change
thoughts
a little bit.
on, sorry, on how many members are you talking about? What size org should have how many members? Is there any good rule of thumb?
Not really. I think yeah, I mean, we have 6 board members and we're 4 people at the moment as employees, which is a bit strange, but I think it's not so bad because it basically puts less pressure on individual board members. So even like this kind of like bigger board, smaller organization can work. So I'm probably more in favor of a little bit bigger boards that have more different views than 2 small ones.
So bigger means like 5 to 7.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. Any parting final wisdom or quickly?
Yeah, I think it's super interesting to see how this discussion is going, like in general in the EU forum and between different organizations. Actually, I think it's really good that we're having a discussion at the moment. So I think out of all the difficult things that came up, I think that can be actually really, really good outcome to actually discuss that and really having changes in the organization. So I'm pretty optimistic in that sense. It will be really interesting to see where we're in a year from now, how many boards we will have changed and what will have changed.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, I think yeah, I'd agree that like I think board membership is a very important thing to get right. At the same time, there aren't that many EA forum posts. I think it's not one of the top interests of EAs about how to run a good board, right? So that's something that over time we'll gain experience and interested in. And I think, yeah, discussions like this are probably a good way of helping make that happen.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for bringing that up and having this discussion.
Yeah, and thanks so much for joining. It was a pleasure.